This is a market update for Chicago, Illinois, January 2016, presented by Terry Buseman's Chicago City Estates team. If you have been keeping an eye on the market, you may have noticed that it slowed down dramatically starting in October. We are all used to a seasonal slowdown at the end of the year as the holidays move into our lives, but this was a little more than usual. The reason for it is that there is a new regulation called TRID that has been delaying closings. TRID stands for Tilla Respa Integrated Disclosure. In short, it is a new form that borrowers receive before closing on a home that clearly details the costs associated with the transaction. Buyers have always received something similar, but it was hard to read and understand, and it was often presented very shortly before closing, which could make closings take a long time if anything was wrong. The new forms must be presented to the borrower 3 days in advance of closing. Hence, starting in November, it took an average of 3 days longer to close on a loan. Once TRID has been in place for a while, it should help the actual closings run smoother and faster. TRID isn't the only thing that has concerned buyers lately, however. Many are also concerned about low inventory, saving for a down payment, and rising mortgage rates, which are all valid concerns. Nationwide, housing supply is down 1.9% year over year. In the city of Chicago, it is down 8.7%. This can vary dramatically between neighborhoods and housing types, but overall, the city's month supply of inventory has been under 6 months. When there is less than 6 months of inventory, we are in a seller's market. This is good for sellers because prices appreciate when there is more demand than supply. However, if you are thinking of selling, it might be a good idea to do so before the next high-rise is built. Remember, there are quite a few buildings proposed surrounding Grant Park. What low inventory does for unprepared buyers is make it more difficult to purchase a home before someone more qualified comes along. This is why it is important for buyers to understand how to get a mortgage and what one really needs to qualify. The top 4 things that can make getting a mortgage more difficult are insufficient income, insufficient credit score, too much debt, and lack of a down payment. It's up to you to manage the income you need to purchase the property you want, but let's look at the last 3. Of course, the better FICO score you have, the easier it is to get a loan, but not everyone has a stellar score. You may be recovering from a layoff or starting a new business, which can take some time to recover from. Depending on the kind of loan you get, you may have more wiggle room with your credit score than you thought. The average FICO score for conventional loans is at 754. For VA, it's a little lower at 706, and FHA, the average is at 687. Not only that, but FICO Score Requirements have been going down. In November, the average FICO score for all closed loans was 721. Compare that to January of 2015, when the average was 731. One thing that affects your credit score is your debt-to-income ratio, or DTI, and the amount of debt you have is another factor that can make getting a loan more difficult. To calculate your DTI, simply add up all your monthly debt payments and divide them by your gross monthly income. The average DTI for conventional loans is at 35%. For a VA loan, the average is 40%, and FHA loan averages are 42%. Just by knowing your FICO score and DTI, you can start to get a sense of what kind of loan you might qualify for. But don't forget the down payment. You still need some cash to close, although it might not be as much as you think. The average down payment for conventional loans is 31%. For VA, it's 2%. And FHA, it's 4%. However, your lender will consider your credit score, DTI, and down payment together to determine what loan he can offer you. For example, someone with stellar credit score and low DTI will not be required to have as hefty of a down payment for a conventional loan as someone who has a higher DTI or lower credit score. An interesting thing to consider is the typical down payment of different buyer types. The average down payment for first-time buyers is 6%, and for repeat buyers it's 14%. Generally, repeat buyers are people who are moving up to a larger property, so they can use equity from the sale of their current home and perhaps some savings to come up with a down payment for the new home. With this information, you can be prepared to understand how much home you can afford. One other thing to consider is interest rates. Mortgage rates have been hovering just around 4% lately, but they expect to climb to 4.63% by the end of the year. While this is still quite low, it is something to consider. This chart shows how rates can impact the amount of home a buyer can afford. With today's rates at 3.86%, one could afford a $400,000 home with a monthly payment of about $1,900. If the rates rise to 6.3% as expected, that same buyer can only afford about $370,000. That's a $30,000 difference, or in downtown Chicago, a parking space. Mortgage rates tend to affect buyers differently. They are often the biggest concern for first-time home buyers. Remember, their average down payment is only 6%, so they really want the most affordable mortgage, which will allow them to build equity faster. Next are move-up buyers. They usually have more to put down, so slight changes in mortgage rates won't make as big of a difference in what they can afford. As we mentioned at the beginning, inventory is low, which causes prices to go up. In fact, nationwide they are expected to rise an average of 3.9%. Mortgage rates are also expected to rise. Now that you know what is considered in qualifying for a mortgage, where prices are heading, and how that can affect how much home you can afford, you are prepared to decide whether you are ready to head to the closing table. At the beginning of this report, we briefly discussed the new regulation, TRID. In the accompanying blog, please find more information about what TRID is and what you can expect at your next closing.